And just like this,
Welcome.
welcome. Episode 10,
1-0.
Immersive Talks with Jen
Hey.
and Marco from Immersive Arts. How are you, Jen?
I'm doing fine, Marco.
Yeah.
Very good. Headed into a new year tomorrow. I know we already had one, but for me, it's going to be part 2. It's me birthday.
It's a birthday. Jen is a birthday girl tomorrow, so I don't know when you guys are going to listen. Probably 20 years in the future. But wish Jen a happy birthday.
Thanks.
So today, Jen, we are talking about a topic that it's very fun for me.
Near and dear to your heart.
Near and dear to my art.
Your art.
Heart and
Heart
art.
and art.
Heart and art. But I have some struggles talking about it. But I think it would be a nice conversation that we could have together.
Too.
So thank you for letting me talk about this. We decided. You decided.
Yeah, I decided this time, but I think it's important. So without further ado, why don't you introduce the topic? You do the honors.
So the topic has this... has the name of virtual primitivism. It's, in my opinion, a very interesting topic, and already the name of it could make some of you and sometimes us a little bit confused, but that's the beauty of it.
Also excited.
So I usually see the art, the art world, the art history as like you can see cycles in it, you know. Before the modern era, so before the 1800 and stuff like that, it was very slow, of course, because we were still figuring out some of the things. You know, we were figuring out perspective, we were figuring out techniques and stuff like this. And I can always like to divide it in 3 different big eras, you know. One is like the very primitive, how do you say?
Like cave painting?
Simple, like very simple. They're usually archaic, usually stocked as you would think. For example, that's how it's also divided usually in Greek statues, for example. There's usually like the archaic statues from Greek, like from beginning, where they were like, you know, simplified, blah, blah, blah. Then we arrive into a classic period where they're more like balance. They're balance form. You know, it's where all of the statues that you would think about Romans or Greek time are.
Didn't one of them have statues that were more proportionate than another one? Like weren't the Greeks more accurate, or was it the other way around when it came to statue making?
Well, Romans, of course.
Mr. Italian.
Romans definitely took a lot from Greek, from the Greek way of making sculptures and stuff like that. And at the time, actually, a lot of Roman sculptures were copies of Greek, more ancient Greek sculpture. Because that's how you do it at the time. You just like copy different designs and just
but there were more people, right? Like
in the Roman Empire,
general, like statue making, it wasn't usually representative of something else, like a tree. It was usually of people, right?
Yeah, that's true. Usually people, or like mythological stories, or you know, this kind of stuff. Yeah, definitely. And then from like a more classical period, you come what I would call as like Baroque, like something that is like very extravagant.
I'm in that period every day. Baroque.
Baroque. very, very extravagant, very like with way too much, in my opinion. Like in the way that you portray things, or like in the way you think about stuff. Blah blah blah. Who cares?
Can you do that in a statue? Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Way too much. Like you imagine the one that has like a lot of flowers and stuff like that don't necessarily like help with the concept. They're just like there to look nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Decorative.
And in my opinion, we are a little bit in this period artistically, like with pop art and things like this. It's around that time. But because finally we talk about digital and virtual art, I think that we are at the time of this new beginning. Okay. And that will be the beginning of virtual art, in a way, the way that I think about it. It's a lot of talking from me, sorry guys. The reason why I call it virtual primitivism is that we are in a time where people can finally use virtual tools in the same easiness, quote unquote easiness, that you would use any other instrument, like a brush or stuff like that, because software has become a little bit more intuitive to work with and things like this. And now making art or making projects it's a little bit easier. So that makes you experience virtual art a little bit more, the making of virtual art a little bit more easy and intuitive, a little bit more human. Exactly like, for example, some cave painting will just be made with a rock, like very simple tools and very easily and expressionistically, I don't know how to say. So that's why. Now I don't know what you think about virtual primitivism is, Jan.
I have my own opinions, but I'm gonna let you finish with my Kanye voice.
That's pretty much finished. That's pretty much finished from my point of view. Then I can probably talk a little bit more, but
I definitely want you to talk a little bit about your own art and how you represent this concept in your art. But yeah, I can talk a little bit on my ideas about it, because Marco and I have gone way too deep, in my opinion, down this rabbit hole, because I think we're both kind of truth seekers in a way. Like we like to get to the bottom of things. We don't just like to say things just to say things. And we talked a lot about this. Personally, I did my own research, wrote about 2 pages on it for no reason. And I started with defining what virtual means by itself, and then defining what primitivism means by itself, and then putting the two together. Maybe that's not the best way to do it, but I think that English constructs of the language, when you put one word before the other and you put 2 words together, that it means something. So virtual is defined as, it can be defined as the word almost, in quotes. So it means that it's of essence, like similar to the real thing, but it is not the actual real thing. So you can say it's virtually cold, or it's like I virtually got sick, or I was virtually fed up. It means, by definition, it means almost, or in everything but name.
Yeah, it in a way that it's transcends its physical form, let's say, or whatever.
Exactly.
It's like an abstraction of whatever you're talking about.
I like the word because it means that something is changing in form, in substance, in matter, but the essence of it is remaining the same.
Yeah.
Which is why I really like the word. It's not. I would use the word essential rather than virtual, but for what we have, I like the word virtual. And in today's day and age, people kind of use it very loosely, just to mean everything that's computerized or in zeros and ones, which is true. But it's also true that you can have a virtual apple. If I paint an apple on a canvas, it's not really an apple, is it? But it's still representative of an apple. In essence, it is an apple. So you can also say that a painting is virtually something, is virtually blank. So there's the word virtual. And I think in the way you use it, Marco, you kind of mean this transcendent, like you said, physically, but more towards the computerized.
Because to be honest, it's both. That's why I don't necessarily like. It's such a beautiful word, especially now, in this age, because to me, it makes sense for both. It makes sense for both as an abstraction of a physical entity concept, and both because I want to use the digital technology, like this kind of stuff.
Digital exclusively means computer.
Yeah,
it means computerized, zeros and ones, whereas virtual can have other meanings. And then you come to the second word, which is primitivism. Also a very interesting concept. It's when you add an ism on the end, I learned it actually like conceptualizes the word. It makes it a little broader. It's not, if you stop at the word primitive, it means something completely different than primitivism, which is an entire like ideal of a way to live. And yeah, primitivism, you kind of already touched on it. It's very it's marked a lot by the tools. So when you speak of primitivism, it has a lot to do with what you have at your like means of disposal. So like you said, if I have a rock, then I'm making cave paintings, which are very primitive because I have primitive, simple tools. It in essence means simple. Also, not to be confused with minimalism, which is something very similar but not the same thing.
It can be thought as similar, yeah, but it's a little different.
Yeah, it's a good way to grasp
I can talk a little bit about. Sometimes I was thinking about using the word minimalism to describing what I wanted to say, but I think one of the main thing about minimalism is the complete removal of the artist from the
exactly
from the project that you're making, which is not what I want. I want exactly the opposite. I want something that it's more representative of what the essence of a human action is. And when I think about primitive, not only in terms of chronological primitive humans, but also like primitive in a way at the essence, at the beginning, part of the raw essential part that we all have, let's say. And that's why I want to say primitivism, because I want to portray that powerful raw essence of a human.
Yeah,
I want that to be portrayed. That's why minimal doesn't work.
Yeah, I think the word choice for what you want, for adding human in it, is good. So then I think Marco and I had not problems, but room for further discussion when we put the two words together. And to me, virtual primitivism is using these simple tools that we have at our disposal in now the virtual space. So exactly the same of how you would use a rock or whatever pigment whatever you have laying around to produce something like a cave painting is the same way that we are now interacting with the virtual space. Since it's so democratic now and so accessible to most people who don't necessarily have training, don't necessarily have money, they're just using whatever it is at their disposal, meaning like Paint, the program Paint or Paint 3D, which is on most computers. Just these basic, simple tools to draw. Maybe they only have Photoshop and they're cutting and pasting. I would use an example of memes as virtual primitivism because it's the most simple copy and paste of copying like a tweet or some text and then juxtaposing it with a picture. To me, that's all the person had to get their message across was the most basic, simple cut and paste tools, and then they create this thing. Again, in my opinion, it's very inherent on the tools that are accessible to the artist or to the person using it. So I think it's this very beautiful moment. I think it's a moment. I don't know if it's everlasting, but in my opinion, virtual primitivism is the, maybe we're even going out of that moment as the internet matures, but it was or is this moment that people are just now beginning to get a hold of these tools and they want to create with it. They want to expand what the possibilities are artistically or not.
So yes, that is a chronological way to describe virtual primitivism, and it does work. It does work as a word itself. If used in a chronological sense, meaning it's literally the primitive times of that specific form. But I also imagine it in a more abstract and completely out of any time frame, because so I usually connect it very much to like a techno club or like something like that. Now let me paint you the picture so you can maybe see what I'm saying. So when you are in a club and you are dancing, you're letting out your emotions, blah blah blah. Maybe you're a little drunk, so you don't even have that logical side of your head. You're just complete expression and emotion, very human rawness. You just wanna dance and stuff like that. Okay, that plus just imagine having that kind of feeling, but with beats that are more bass, simple, crude, like techno is, for example, boom, boom, like that kind. And you will notice yourself dancing in a different way. Then you will be like, oh, I'm just drunk and I'm listening to pop music. So the feeling that it will give you dancing in that specific thing with like this very bassy sound that by definition are usually like more, they hit something a little bit more inside. It's something a little bit more literally primitive, like almost, that feeling to me is virtual primitivism.
Why is it virtual?
Virtual because it uses also tools that are coming from digital and thing. But the reason why I use virtual and not digital or stuff like that is that I like the idea of encompassing also, like, to make understand this abstraction of this feeling is not necessarily like just chronological. That's why, like, it can be also thought as an abstraction of this feeling. Is not that, like, you can always have this feeling, but yeah, virtual is perfect in this case if you use computers and stuff like that, because it's just perfect. Like, we talk about virtual in that case as well, and all the things that you said were very right. Like, we are in this time where, like, and we are at the beginning using these tools, these new tools, and that falls perfectly, and we use it very crudely. Yeah, it's just like when you see Mario for the Nintendo 64 and stuff like that.
It's all polygonal.
Yeah, that's a very simplified. Just imagine that you can achieve the same every time with the same kind of mind state. So it is a little bit minimal, because like it would make you use more simpler forms, for example, or more.
I think the minimalism is a byproduct of the primitivism, if that makes sense. I think it ends up being minimal because that's inherent in primitivism itself. But I wouldn't, yeah, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't use the word minimalism in the sense that it's been used.
Yeah,
it's just that's the problem. Happens to be minimal.
Yeah, in art history, that's how it's been thought about. And I could have used, like, I would have loved also to use like essential inside there somewhere, like essential as a word, essentialism. I don't know. But I usually say this, that I don't like essential because it's too much thought in spiritual terms most of the time. Like, it's thought by most people, when you say essential, they connect it too much on spiritual sometimes, and which I don't like. It's definitely not inside there. That's why
it is, though. Like, I've also gone down the word essentialism, which I really like and I use in my own concepts, but I think for you primitivism is good because similarly to minimalism, essentialism doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be human either. Like, what is essential may or may, like, we may not even ever be able to articulate what the essentials of something or some concept is. Maybe there's no human involvement at all. So primitivism, in my opinion, is the perfect word, because at something's essence, who knows, like, because we can't necessarily get there ever, which is the paradox of it, then who knows if humans lie at the center of it.
Right. But yeah, that's a very good point.
I like that because I hang out with Marco like every day, literally. So I have the joys of being of him literally pointing out when something is virtual primitivism in his mind. So I can experience something and then he's like, oh, this is what I mean when I say virtual primitivism. So I can see and I can like feel what you mean when you say it, and I think you chose the right words for it, although we've had many debates.
Yeah, it's more of a feeling at the moment. That's why I struggle. Like, it's getting a little bit more concrete in my mind, but it's more of a feeling at the moment. Like, I can describe a situation where I could get that feeling exactly like I did with the techno club, for example. But yeah, if I talk about it, I definitely have more of an understanding, exactly like we did just now.
Well, I want to go into a little bit more about your art, because you've kind of touched on what virtual primitivism is in music, and I think that's understandable for most people when you say like that feeling that you get. But you mentioned earlier about sculptures with Greeks and Romans, and you're also doing sculptures, and you're doing virtual primitivism sculptures. You want to talk about that a little bit?
So that's what I try to portray when I try to do sculptures. So let's say that I do sculpture using like 3D modeling programs and stuff like that, exactly like you would do it with other tools, traditional. But like for the first time in like human history, we have the possibility to make 3D forms in a more expressionistic way. So in the same way that, for example, Pollock was making this painting in a like, well, abstract expressionism, go into that. I can, with the same state of mind and the same kind of way that I can approach with the same state of mind also sculpture making for the first time, because with the tools that we have now, we can extrude like forms or like model things extremely quickly and extremely also with a lot of gesture now with virtual reality and stuff like that. You can actually like squeeze forms and therefore making 3D sculptures that are expressionistic and stuff like that. So
yeah, because before, I mean, it took a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
Like, who knows what the fuck it would even turn out. If you chisel the wrong amount, then your sculpture is fucked. So you had to take good, careful time, a little bit of planning, what you're going to make, have some models. But now you're saying that's not even necessary anymore. You can kind of go in with a free mind and actually express yourself with sculpture for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm still like learning this process, but that's the type of mind that I get into when I work, when I try to work. And it falls into my definition of virtual primitivism. Well, I try to make it fall. Well, I'm trying to
align
it, because I am tapping into something very primitive in my sculpture making, and very human, because it's me. I'm trying to, get rid of all my, let's say, logical and become like pure expression, let's say.
Expressionism is neat because, for those who don't know, it's very much occurring within the moment. Like, you arrive to the canvas or wherever you create the art, and it's happening there. Whatever you bring to that moment, to that time, in that space, is what the fuck happens.
Should be an expression, literally an expression of you in that moment.
In that moment. It's
in
some
that
people
point in time.
Call it action art.
Yeah, that's true. Some type of performance art are like that as well.
Yeah.
So get into that with sculptures for the first time, and I'm using computers and stuff like that, so it falls into like a little bit the virtual art in the terms of computers.
Well, it's made possible by the virtual.
Yeah.
Literally.
And also it's an abstraction of a sculpture itself. Like, it doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist as a sculpture. The only way that I could make this sculpture alive would be maybe through 3D printing and things like this, but the way that it comes out will never be the same as I made it into the 3D program. So that's why it's also virtual, in the sense that it is abstract, is metaphysical. It transcends its physical form because it doesn't have one. That's why it's kind of good. Like, all we see of that is representation of that sculpture. You never see, or never, like, you never will be able to experience the real sculpture. So that's why virtual also falls perfectly inside.
That's why virtual is nice itself, because you have these objects, these virtual objects, and is it real, is it not? That's up to your opinion. But if you're experiencing something, whether it be in the quote unquote real space or the virtual one, it's still affecting you in some way. So you could argue that this virtual object is real in some sense. And the way that you're building them and the way that you're creating them makes it only able to be experienced in its full form where it was created in the virtual space, which is so cool, because when you see them translated into the real world, you get all these kind of errors and all these like misformations or these little flaws that happen, and it's fun to think about because you can think of them as like battle scars from being birthed into the real world, or birthmarks, if you will.
That's true. Literally, I call them as like errors in translation between the virtual and the real world. Like, exactly like if I have to talk in Italian, I would talk in a way, and then if I had to translate the same stuff, it will maybe in English. If I had to translate it in English, it will feel a little bit different, or like
things get lost in translation.
Exactly.
Even in the virtual to the real realm. I like to think that something can be considered the same if you think of its function rather than its form. Because if you focus on the form of your sculpture in the virtual space versus the form in the physical space, obviously someone's going to be able to tell, okay, this is not real, speaking of the virtual object, versus this is real, speaking of the object that has been 3D printed or whatever you have it. But if you think of it in terms of function, like, what is this sculpture for? Is it for to make an impression on the viewer? Well, then it's the same fucking sculpture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just nice when you translate anything, whether it be sculpture, a drawing, an experience, whatever, you have it from the real to the virtual or from the virtual to the real. It's always interesting to think about these things, and I think you found a great way of representing it.
Yeah. Guys, that's how we end this episode. Sorry for the philosophicalness of this episode, but
never apologize for philosophical times.
Yeah, and that's how we like to spend our days.
And happy that you shared it with us.
Yeah, thank you. So if you have some thoughts about this, please let us know at Immersive Arts on Instagram and Facebook. We have the SoundCloud where we post this podcast every time. So yeah, thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Marco.
And thank you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
See ya, guys.